Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Israel Hawkins. Well, Jeff, you know, a lot of churches throughout the United States are closing, as a recent study conducted found. More are closing than opening. And then we're also going to look at how Chile is dealing with its COVID-19 outbreak over in that region. And we're going to look at a meat supplier, one of the largest meat suppliers in the United States, that was recently cyber attacked. Yeah, that's right. That's been going on quite a bit. But first, we're going to look at journalist and author Billy Hallowell, who recently was interviewed by CBN's FaithWire News, discussing why churches are closing faster than they open, according to a study done by Lifeway Research in 2019. This is a trend that is expected to continue as COVID-19 lingers on. Well, data analyzed by 34 Protestant denominations found that 3,000 churches started in that year versus 4,500 which actually closed. Well, even though closures of churches increased, another study showed that Bible reading actually started to increase.
Interesting. And it wasn't too long ago that we talked about how people were leaving the churches.
That's
so
right.
This might be the end of that wave that some of those churches are now closing.
Hard to keep a facility open if there's no income being generated to make that so.
Well, as we've mentioned in previous broadcasts, extreme weather events are on the rise, as been now for some time. Across the Midwest, drought is increasing, and the western part of the U.S. is being hit the hardest, with water reservoirs below normal and expected to hit historic lows very soon. From the Rio Grande to the Rockies, record lows in water supplies are putting an already extra burden on the land and the people who depend on it for its resources.
Well, across the Atlantic to the UK, the vaccine development minister, Nadeem Zohawi, says that the government is proposing making COVID vaccines mandatory for NHS frontline workers. Well, already healthcare workers, including surgeons, have to get mandatory vaccinations for Hep B. Now, opponents of the proposal say that there's no comparison with the Hep B vaccine, as it has been properly tried, tested, and licensed. Not so with the COVID-19 vaccine, which has at least until 2023 before it's approved for licensing.
Okay. Well, people are essentially becoming human guinea pigs, as the UK government has coerced people in the healthcare fields and the general public to get these vaccines. Simon Clark, a microbiologist with the University of Reading, said, "This is a political decision, and one that has been coming down the tracks ever since the vaccines were released. But it's not a surprise at all, and I suspect that they'll end up making it mandatory for all staff."
Well, on over to Southeast Asia, where in Vietnam's capital, Hanoi, no international flights are being allowed to land. This follows a similar decree in Ho Chi Minh City just a few days ago. Although infections in Vietnam were low for most of last year, they have risen significantly since April of this year. Also in Taiwan, a country once praised for its efforts in containing the virus, saw clusters starting to emerge once it relaxed its pandemic restrictions. Well, Ko Wen-ji, Taipei's mayor, said, "When you're very successful, you are not forced to improve. Only when you fear, then you are forced to improve. So we were too successful in the past year." Well, in Malaysia, a 2-week lockdown beginning on Tuesday means only essential services and businesses are allowed to operate. Health officials in Malaysia said that the surge in cases are caused by more infectious variants and people breaching pandemic restrictions to celebrate the Muslim festival of Eid last month.
So far, Malaysia has recorded 2,800 COVID-related deaths, with about 40% of those being in May alone. Now, vaccination rates in Asia remain low, with on average only 6% of the population receiving at least one dose. Now, experts say that containment of the virus must be the priority for now.
Well, Archie Clements, an infectious disease expert, said, as communities, we have to come together to accept movement restrictions, border controls, the use of personal protective equipment, along with practicing good hygiene. We will be stuck with this until we get high coverages of vaccines, and that's the only way out.
Dr. Abhishek Rimal, the IFRC Asia Pacific Emergency Health Coordinator, said these countries have done very well during the first wave of COVID-19. But since we're into a year of this pandemic, many people are sick and tired of following the rules and regulations and want to go back to normal life.
He continued, on top of that, these countries are also seeing the variants of concern, which is much more transmissible and infectious than the previous strains. Well, lowering our guard and variants of concern are the two major causes of a spike in Southeast Asia. More studies need to be done to determine if the new variant, that's the combination of the UK and Indian strain, is the cause of this latest infection, which is highly transmissible, not only for Vietnam, but other states around Vietnam.
Well, he concluded, if this is true, we are looking for a major rise in COVID-19 in the region. Now, and it looks like, Katan, that not just the variants, because remember we talked about it, it was just the variants that were giving them so much trouble, but now it's the combination of those variants that are making the job of the healthcare professionals who are trying to stay ahead of the pandemic that much more difficult.
Right. That makes it extremely difficult to handle these infections. Well, we're going to turn it over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, who has a little bit more on COVID, but outside of the United States, still in the Americas here, in South America, in Chile, and to see how Chile as well as other countries are dealing with COVID-19, and of course, what's taking place in Russia as well. Larry, what do you have for us?
The new reality is that there will hardly be anything to speak of outside of plagues, rather having to do with the numbers of those impacted or infected, or the policies and measures debated and proposed in futile efforts to contain it. The plague of the moment has had the headlines secured in its palm, and there are no reasonable indications that that will change. Chile is the latest country abuzz with hope regarding vaccinations. For many of its citizens, though, it's not so much a belief that the concoctions will protect from disease as much as it is a desire to work and move about more freely that is motivating them to pursue and accept the shot. Accepting inoculation in Chile means receiving a vaccination pass that essentially frees a person from a lot of the restrictions associated with COVID. But even despite the high rate of vaccination within the country, the virus is still spreading, and the numbers of those newly infected is increasing. That increase is being reflected in multiplicity as multiple countries are being hard hit. Argentina is reporting 3 million confirmed cases of the plague within its country, along with Nepal, which has recorded over 500,000 cases, and Bahrain in the Middle East are said to be experiencing over 2,000 cases per day. Moscow has strove to keep its experience with the virus somewhat quiet, but reports are now leaking, revealing that the plague is marching through Russia just as rapidly as it is in other nations. The country is said to have a very low vaccination rate, and to cope with rising infections, the nation has established a special hospital unit specifically dedicated to COVID patients. The hospital has also had to add on intensive care units to address increasing needs. Doctors at the hospital say it is the severity of the cases which they are seeing trend upward. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan, Jeff, back to you.
Well, Katan, it looks like Russia is no exception to seeing a rise in COVID-19 cases. And, you know, like many other countries, they're trying to push the vaccinations in hope that that's going to curb the quick spread. And, you know, as we're seeing the variants taking place now, we're starting to see that third and fourth wave of the coronavirus take place. Well, first it was the gas pumps, now it's the meat market, as another ransomware attack hits the U.S. Now, the world's largest meat processing company, JBS, was forced to cease cattle slaughtering operations as it became the latest company to fall victim to a major cyber attack. Now, to understand the scope of JBS's production, the company's 5 biggest plants here in the U.S. handle more than 22,000 cattle a day.
Wow. Well, Brazil-based JBS was forced to cease operations at 13 of its meat processing plants in the U.S. The company is the top beef producer in the West and the #2 pork and poultry producer. Yeah.
Well, in a CBS News interview, Brad Koima, president of Koima Verilic Trading Company, was asked if the average American would see prices rise. He responded, "I think that depends on how long this lasts. I think if JBS is unable to slaughter cattle or hogs over a sustained period and really even a matter of days, then yes."
Well, the FBI is now investigating this latest attack, and administration officials are now asking the Russian government for an explanation. Just last month, a Russian hacking group, the Dark Side, claimed responsibility for a ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline and walked away with nearly $5 million. Well, JBS says it's trying to restore its systems as soon as possible, but it is unclear how much money the hackers were demanding or if any ransom was paid.
We'll probably find out more of those details in the days to come, just to see, if they actually did have to pay a ransom to get their system back up and going. Well, Russia continued its war of words, issuing a new warning to the United States, saying it would send an array of, quote, unpleasant signals to the U.S. in the coming days. Now, the comments come ahead of President Biden's planned summit with Vladimir Putin in Geneva next month. And there was no indications what those surprises will be, but Russian analysts feel no big changes will come out of the Geneva talks. And if you remember, Katan, during the Cold War, it was where Reagan and Gorbachev met, and despite it being considered the neutral of neutral environments, it's frankly where adversaries meet.
That's right. Well, NATO has been a thorn in Russia's side for over 20 years, and with the continuous expansion and activity of NATO, Russia has announced it will be adding 20 new military units to its western border by year's end, and I'm sure Russia is not pleased about that.
Right. Well, the NATO Secretary General Hans Stoltenberg continues to call for dialogue and said, "We will continue to try to convene the NATO-Russian Council. We want to sit down with Russia because we think it's important to talk, especially when times are so difficult as they are now."
Well, President Biden said he believes President Putin is a killer, which, remember, that statement was made. He does not plan to go easy on him at this upcoming summit. He said, "I'll be meeting with President Putin in a couple of weeks in Geneva, making it clear that we will not stand by and let him abuse those rights," end quote.
Well, but Russia isn't the only country at odds with the United States. Now, we've also been doing a continuous coverage on the U.S.-China relations. Now, the major subject of the tensions, well, China looks at Taiwan as a part of its own country that has broken away. Now, Taiwan, however, claims they are a sovereign nation fighting for their democratic rights amidst China's military harassment.
Well, the threat has increased enough that Taiwan's government sees their military drills could turn into reality. One such drill has pilots scrambling to take to the skies in their American-produced fighter jets in case they are needed to ward off incoming Chinese aircraft. Well, in another scenario, Taiwanese soldiers prepare their defense if China would ever decide to invade by land.
Taiwan believes the threat of war with China is very real, and it's not hard to see why. Now, China just released a video displaying its own drills from sea to land. Now, not to mention the fact that Chinese pilots are flying jets across what is known as the Self-Identified Airspace Defense Identification Zone on a daily basis. And this is the closest Chinese planes have ever come to the island of Taiwan.
Well, senior officials in the Biden administration have told PBS NewsHour they are not anticipating such an invasion by China. However, on top on top U.S. military commander, one top U.S. military commander who was retiring from the Indo-Pacific Command. That was Admiral Phil Davidson. Well, he disagrees and said in a hearing, "I think the threat is manifest during this decade. In fact, in the next 6 years." So he's expecting something to, pop off, with China in that area very, very soon.
Well, during Trump's term in office, arms sales had increased to Taiwan, and now President Biden has expanded U.S. naval operations in the region since taking the helm. Now, the new administration is also the first to invite the Taiwanese envoy to Inauguration Day. Our PBS NewsHour interviewed Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu to find out what the government thought China's intentions are.
Minister Wu said, "I think Beijing has been preparing for war against Taiwan, and that is what we have been seeing. They are preparing for it. If you look at the number of sorties, it's around 2,900 times last year. So the threat has been increasing. Sorties, of course, as if anybody might not realize, with the Air Force, they're basically single planes sent on the mission just to kind of practice. And so basically with those numbers, it's looking like it's about 6 missions a day of those particular sorties. So it's a lot of practicing that's going on in that region.
Wow. Well, Mr. Wu also mentioned what is even more serious about these flights is that, quote, the Chinese sometimes even cross the median line of the Pale Strait, and the median line of the Pale Strait has been safeguarding peace and stability of the Pale Strait for decades. Now, that strait is also known as the Taiwan Strait.
Well, another point that came from the dialogue with Foreign Minister was that Taiwan believes China is trying to cut them out of the international community. One example of this, by preventing them from entering the World Health Organization. Well, China is backed by 170 diplomatic allies who agree Taiwan is just an extension of China. Now, this also keeps them from gaining international recognition. Through force, China is preventing other countries from making contact with Taiwanese governments also.
But probably the most detrimental way they try to sabotage Taiwan, Wu says, is by, quote, engaging in cognitive warfare. They use cyber attack, disinformation, and something similar to disrupt the democratic process here in Taiwan, to create a conflict between the government and society, or to create a distrust between Taiwan and our major ally, which is United States.
Well, the question remains, if China were to actually launch an invasion on the island of Taiwan, would it be ready to defend itself? Foreign Minister Wu said, yes, we are getting better. But at the same time, we also understand the kind of gaps of defense capabilities that we have with China. Therefore, we are assessing the kinds of situation that we need to be in trying to prepare ourselves for it. We understand our role and responsibility as a frontline state, guarding against expansion of authoritarianism.
Well, former U.S. diplomat Henry Kissinger has a lot to say about the U.S.-China conflict. Now, in this next video, take a listen to some of his insights and where these two major powers could be heading. Take a look.
Will U.S.-China tensions lead to a doomsday scenario? According to former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, if a conflict ever erupts between the two powers, it could lead to colossal dangers.
Legendary diplomat Henry Kissinger has labelled China the biggest problem for America and the world.
For the first time in human history, humanity has capacity to extinguish itself in a finite period of time.
In a recent interview, Kissinger said that while nuclear weapons during the Cold War had the capacity to inflict vast damage, advances in nuclear technology and artificial intelligence, where China and the US are both leaders, have multiplied the doomsday threat.
Escalating tensions between the U.S. and China have stoked the narrative of an all-out artificial intelligence arms race between the two countries.
Even if your robots are defeated, the next stage is that their robots will start killing your people.
Given his history, Kissinger may be one of the most credible voices when it comes to U.S.-China relations. He served as Secretary of State to President Richard Nixon and President Gerald Ford between 1973 and 1977. Kissinger was also the architect of establishing relations between the US and China as part of an effort to isolate the USSR.
Dr. Henry Kissinger sits in on the talks that are animated, constructive, and frank. At the summit, face to face, two leaders who direct the destiny of 1 out of 3 persons on the earth. The gate to friendly contact, says Zhou Enlai, has finally been opened.
I gotta tell you, the dark side of Henry Kissinger is very, very dark.
For Kissinger, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was one-dimensional, focused mostly on nuclear weapons and the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. The Soviet Union couldn't match the US economically. They only had a military technological capacity. But China is a different story. The world's most populous country has shown that its economic might and technological capabilities could be as threatening as its military force.
The country's economy opened up to the rest of the world, a move that ultimately turned China into a global economic powerhouse.
Astonishing economic growth over the decades has provided resources needed to boost military research and development. These changes are part of China's military being on the path to becoming a more powerful force.
Kissinger said US policy towards China must take a two-part approach, standing firm on US principles to demand China's respect, while maintaining constant dialogue and finding areas of cooperation. Under President Donald Trump, relations with China worsened, which included a trade war that cost hundreds of billions of dollars. And President Joe Biden has maintained that hawkish stance towards China.
China has an overall goal, and I don't criticize them for the goal, but they have an overall goal to become the leading country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and the most powerful country in the world. That's not going to happen on my watch.
Recently, the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also warned that the way we fight the next major war is going to look very different from the way we fought the last ones. And that could be a sign that Kissinger's stark warning may have some truth even now. Over the last several years, analysts have already been predicting the world is entering a new Cold War.
USA versus China, a new Cold War?
If this new type of Cold War escalates, it could impact the cost of our goods.
I think we're in a new Cold War, or we're sliding towards it.
Kissinger's direct role in opening up China, which led to its dramatic rise, has given him an insight few possess. During his negotiations for Nixon's visit to China, Kissinger quoted Premier Zhou Enlai, saying, "This will shake the world." But now it seems if US-China relations go off course, it could help destroy it.
Pretty interesting video there between U.S. and China. You know, the ending comment there, it could help destroy it. And Henry Kissinger is saying that the advances in nuclear weapons have multiplied the doomsday scenario. And of course, you know, with the first Cold War, it was, you know, they had nuclear weapons. However, they're many times more powerful today. So the situation with U.S. and Russia, you know, now we're seeing it with U.S. and China, even though Russia is still at odds with the U.S., but China is a very strong opponent to the U.S. and, you know, any engagement, like the one general said, the way we used to fight wars is not going to be the way this next war is fought.
That's right. And the thing about, like we mentioned in the previous broadcast, was what was taking place back in the early 1900s, the mid 1900s, like in the 50s. Regarding the disputes between the U.S. and China, it was still over that little island of Taiwan. So, that hasn't gone anywhere. And like you mentioned about the advancement of nuclear weapons, but not only the advancement of nuclear weapons, but new technologies with hypersonic missiles and Russia's new underwater missile and everything. I mean, it's making it so that the concern is preemptive strike and where's it going to come from? So that has a lot of countries, leaders of countries on edge, and then you throw all of this environmental disasters and COVID in the mix, that just puts everybody on a heightened state of alert.
Right, and along with that heightened state of alert, it seems as if the leaders of these countries don't really make any progress when they get down and talk, when they sit down and talk. It seems like it only escalates from there, and they might shake hands and they might do the smiles and so forth, but behind the scenes they're calling each other killers, and they're certainly not engaging in any friendly talks or constructive talks. It's only, if you push us, we're going to push back.
That's right.
Well, if you want to learn more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And as we mentioned before, don't forget the Yisrael Says and the Ask Yisrael programs. You can find those by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, the nations might be preparing for war, but at the House of Yahweh, Yisrael Hawkins is preparing to teach peace. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.